Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's jointly hosted webinar by myself, Samantha Manning of Searches UK, and we're kindly joined by Tim and Seb of Terra Firma. Just a bit of housekeeping. Can I double check that everyone can hear me? If you could kindly let me know in the chat or would like to ask any information or require any further information, please do let us know in the chat. We will have a Q&A in the middle and at the end of the webinar, so we will get round to everyone's questions. And at the end of the webinar, just to make you aware, we will send out a recording so that you've got a live recording, and you'll also have the slides provided by ourselves at Searches UK. But for now, let me hand over to Tim, and thank you all for attending.
All right, thank you very much, Sam. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, and thank you very much for your time this morning. My name is Tim Longdon. I'm a product owner at Terra Firma. I've been with the company for near 4 years, and my background is as a geologist. So the first part of the session I'll be doing is very much focusing on the ground hazards in the south, after which it should be about 20-25 minutes, and we'll have a little Q&A session, after which we'll then hand over to Seb, who will then go through a bit more about the process. Seb, if you want to just quickly introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name's Seb Colker. I'm an account manager here at Terra Firma. Started quite recently, so started at the beginning of March with Terra Firma. My background being in the search industry for the past 10 years. And yeah, as Tim touched on, I'll just go over the ground report and its relevant modules after Tim's presentation.
Perfect, cheers, Seb. Yes, so there is in the GoToWebinar feature, there is a question and answer function. So please do drop any questions in there at any time, and we will then review them at the Q&A session at the end. Doesn't necessarily have to be, if you think of a question for my section of the report later, then we can do that at another time. So without further ado, I will crack on. So hopefully you can all see my screen. So today I'm going to be talking about hidden ground hazards in the south. While I do have only 20 minutes, it means I can only go through a select number of these. So I do apologize if I can't go through more, but I'm going to be focusing really on other mining hazards and also then some natural ground perils. So firstly, touching on all other mining. So this is very much a feature that is close to our hearts because there is currently a lot of legislation surrounding coal mining. And so all other mining here essentially referring to everything other than coal. An important thing to note with coal mining is, of course, that there is the Coal Mining Substance Act, which gives a responsibility to the coal authority to put right any damages that might result from any past lawful coal mining operations. That, in essence, acts as a safety net in the sense that if something were to go wrong, then the responsibility would not be that of the homeowner. Unfortunately, no such Subsidence Act or legislation is in effect for any other mining hazards. And considering when we look at this next image here, which are marking some of the key areas of known underground workings in the country, you can see that there is a massive legacy for these non-coal mining hazards, and it stretches all over the country. And while if there was any potential subsidence or damage to the main building of the property, that's more often than not will be covered under a buildings insurance policy. However, damages to access routes, damages to sort of grounds that are owned by that property can then often fall under the basically be liable for the homeowners put right out of their pocket, and the investigation costs and subsequent remediation costs for some of these workings can be significant in the order of tens of thousands. So it's very important to consider the presence of these workings when acting in these other mining areas. So this map here, just to serve as a visual guide for where these are. There is, of course, some good knowledge about certain of these areas, such as tin and copper mining in the southwest. However, less well known is very much the rest of that tin and copper mining and other lead and non-ferrous metal mining, which you can see stretched across areas of Wales, in Derbyshire, and in the north of England. But really, for the south, if we move past the tin and copper in the southwest, as it is a very well-known feature, the key sort of mining regions in the south are very much chalk mining, which you can see by this pale yellow band, which sort of swathes across the south and east of England. Chalk mining has occurred since Neolithic times, and as a consequence, there is a lot of unrecorded workings which are very difficult to pinpoint. And then in the Weald Basin between the North Downs and the South Downs, you can see there is this area of ironstone working and also a little area of gypsum workings. So a big mining legacy in the south, and that is because pretty much everything that we see and interact with on a daily basis has had some sort of legacy to the ground, and be it bricks, or clays and shales, and chalks used for brick making processes or agriculture, to copper used for wiring, and then steel for cars. Pretty much every town in the UK has some sort of mining legacy, and therefore it does require some consideration. So in terms of some numbers to go behind this, there are almost 33,000 land registry parcels that are within 40 metres of a non-coal mine. And I should stress that that is just a recorded point location of these non-coal mines. The underground working extents of these can then be quite significant, and therefore that is very much a conservative number of land registry parcels within the influence of these non-coal mines. In terms of how they can affect today, just in the media and sort of news articles, there have been 92 recorded non-coal collapses since 2014, so still very much a prevalent feature today. And this is something that is ongoing. There are still today current extraction ongoing, and there was in 2018 201 million tonnes of minerals extracted from the UK landmass. And while that previous map did just show some of the key mining groups, there have been over 55 different minerals mined and extracted across this country, so a fairly significant number. And as mentioned in news articles, you do start to see that a lot of these come up as sinkholes being a real sort of key interest in the moment. And that is, I should stress, the sort of worst manifestation for how these mining hazards can affect property and land, but it is also one that can then be the most costly and significant. And while I'll go through a couple of case studies in a bit more detail, these articles just to show that they are occurring still very recently in sort of in modern times, and also all over the country. So we've got London, we've got St Albans, we've got Cornwall, we've got Norwich, we've got Sheffield, we've got Wales, we've got Cumbria, back to Cornwall and back to London. And this latest one in London is also an important one to note because it was actually a new build estate. And so there has been often a bit of a sort of a sense of security adopted when buying a new build, and that should be all fine. But these hazards can be basically owing to the fact that they are often difficult to find and require some real keen investigations to locate, they still can get missed. So my first sort of case study I'm going to talk about is actually sort of covering two, and they are two chalk mining related collapses either side of the Thames. So starting with one on the left, this is following Pinnerwood School in London. You can see from that middle photo there that this was a quite large sinkhole that occurred in the school car park that occurred in 2015. Of course, launched a series of subsequent investigations, and you can probably hopefully just see in that little image on the right that they did some really cool sort of imagery to try and map where these underground workings were beneath the school. And as you can see, they are directly beneath it, and as a result, the school was deemed an unacceptable risk to remain open and had to close for a number of months. So you can imagine the significant disruption that caused, with kids having to move schools, and also then the subsequent costs involved in actually investigating and filling in these workings. And then a very similar sort of collapse did occur at the other side of the Thames at this new build estate in London known as Brickfield Cottages. The Brickfield making reference to their historic land use, which you can see on that old maps being an old brickworks. And you can also see that that collapse occurred right outside of that person's front door or back door, can't really tell. It was 60-foot deep holes, really quite scary, and forced the evacuation of over 50 residents to leave their homes. Now, of course, being a new build, NHBC certificates and sort of developer responsibilities were in place, and therefore the cost didn't fall with the homeowner. But if an equivalent occurrence had happened for a more existing property without such safety nets, then that, of course, could be a liability resultant left with the homeowner. And also a thing to note is that when you do have these collapses, given that they will then be appearing in the news nowadays and then appearing in local searches when doing sort of, Googles to try and find out about the area, seeing these sort of sinkholes and effects can then have a detrimental impact on the market value of property. An important thing to note with old brickworks, just quickly, is that they are often very much associated with historic chalk workings, because chalk was often used within the brickmaking process. And the brickworks, as you can possibly see from that little old map, do have surface workings where they extract those clays and shales for the large parts of the brickmaking, and that will then make the underground chalk more easily accessible. So these two cases are actually intrinsically linked, not just because they are two chalk mines, but because really their geological settings are nearly identical, despite being either side of the Thames. So from this simplified cross-section here, which you can picture as a sort of horizontal slice through northwest London, you've got Pinner, which is up in the Chiltern Hills, and then you've got Plumstead down in the North Downs. And basically this chalk, which is shown as the green section here, maps basically this giant bowl, and it forms a large basin, the London Basin, upon which you then have a thin layer of what is known as the Lambeth group, Lambeth Orthanic group, which is a mixture of clays but also then sands. And then on top of that, you do then have London clays, which in themselves do pose a number of natural issues in terms of possible place subsidence. But in general, where we find these underground workings are most concentrated are in the areas where there is just this thin layer of this Lambeth group covering that chalk. The reason being that surface chalk would then be extracted where the chalk is the main bedrock. But equally, where that is the case, that chalk is often then more highly weathered and therefore not as high quality. And so often underground chalk is a more profitable source to go for. And where it is then located at the peripheries, where you have this thin layer of Lambeth group, that is where we can use our interpretation and these geological models to map out areas of these potential underground workings. And to sort of show that on a map, this map here, again, hopefully showing sort of areas had a note saying my audio has been lost. Can you hear me now, Seb? And everyone? Is the sound back? Okay, I do apologize for that. Yeah, so as I was saying, just from this image, which hopefully you can still see, yes, so you do find these chalk workings very much located on the sort of boundary areas of where this chalk bedrock is and that Lambeth group is. So if we apply that that knowledge to another sort of area, this is a map showing St Albans and a particular area in St Albans. You can see this surrounding green area is that chalk bedrock, and in the middle you have this little blob of Lambeth group. And so here we can basically interpret that there is suitable conditions for underground chalk workings to occur. And if we then look at historic mapping for this region as well, you can actually see that there is a brickfield located in the middle. And as mentioned, brickfields often then have associations with historic chalk workings because they can be used in the brickmaking process. And the clays and shales are then extracted from the surface. And I think a key indication here for us immediately, which would scream out potential risk, is the fact that there is a recorded lime kiln on that site, which confirms the use of chalk or other lime materials in that process. And you might have interpreted by now that that orange triangle is not just mapping a location of a brickfield, it is actually mapping a location of a collapse. And this was the famous 2015 collapse in St Albans on Fontmill Close. So you can see the sheer scale of these collapses are huge. And this, then resulted in massive disruption, cut the utilities for the entire cul-de-sac, and the nearest few homes, the homeowners couldn't return for about 14 months, owing to how long it took to investigate and fill in these workings. So what this essentially goes to show is while we can't necessarily predict exactly when these potential collapses might occur, what we can start to really hone in on using that geological models and also that expert interpretation, knowing the geological conditions and historic land use, we can start to pinpoint where some of these collapses might occur and where a lot of these very historic and often unrecorded mine workings may have occurred. So some key takeaways just for that note is that pretty much every town and city and village in the country has some sort of local mining history. Admittedly, some of these might just be simple surface workings, which don't really pose much of a ground instability risk, but a lot of them can then be quite significant underground workings. And given that there is no safety net in terms of subsistence legislation from the government, it is vital that they are considered in a transaction. The property landowner, as a result, can be the one who are held liable for collapse or substance damage, as there often aren't covered under building insurance policies, which might only just cover the main dwelling. And that data really does have limitations in use because they will locate certain recorded locations, but given that mining record keeping was often quite poor in the past, it does really require the use of both geological models but expert interpretation to really pinpoint the areas of risk. So that is a quick overview of mining. Just quickly onto some natural ground perils. You may hopefully be familiar with these, as these have been reported on with stuff like Enviro reports for a number of years. You will often see them broken down into 6 categories. This map here is showing 5, which are collapsible ground, compressible ground, landslides, running sands and soluble rocks. You will also see some sort of clay shrink swell assessment also. And this map just visually illustrating where these hazards are present. So hopefully it gives you an indication that they are spread nationwide and as a consequence have their own associated risks to property. As an example, for landslides, there's approximately 28 recorded landslides a year, and some of them are pretty significant and ongoing. There's a particular one on the Isle of Wight called, in a place called Ventnor, which is all on a slope which is slowly settling down owing to the steep slope it's built on, and it's costing about an annual cost of 1.4 million a year to monitor and cover up simple road damages associated with that. But not going to talk much about these hazards because the one that I think is most relevant, and particularly to areas such as the south, are coastal hazards. And this being particularly important considering that it was only until only September last year that this information has been available within conveyancing reports. Prior to that, there had been a massive gap in basically any sort of assessments, not necessarily through fault of report providers, more just a lack of reliable and granular data out there to use for this sort of assessment. But given that we are an island nation and that the coast is intrinsically linked into our history and our livelihoods, it was a glaring omission to that sort of assessment in terms of ground hazards. I refer to them as coastal hazards here because it's not just necessarily erosion features that can be a hazard. Coastal erosion can then also trigger localized landslides. And then there's also now, with climate change, coastal flooding issues to be associated as well. So just some numbers behind this. There's about 640,000 properties in the country that are within 250 metres of the coast in England and Wales. Now, I know that while only about a third of England and Wales coastline is eroding at 10 centimetres a year or more, that may not sound like much, and therefore you could argue 250 metres is somewhat of an overstretch. It should be important to note that in certain parts of the country, we have some of the fastest eroding coastlines in Europe, where there's rates of nearly 4 or 5 metres a year being eroded. So over the course of a mortgage lifetime, about 20 years, then you're looking at near 100 metres of coastline being lost during your ownership of that house. And then unfortunately, an issue with coastal hazards is that climate change is now an ongoing feature, and the consequence of this is that we are seeing increasing storm surge events, increasingly severe storms, which are going to devastatingly increase the number of, A, erosion rates, but B, then coastal related floods from these storm surge events. And partly that is going to be facilitated by the sea level rise, and it's expected to have risen by about 70 centimetres by the end of this century. And the stat that always gets me on this one is that a recent Financial Times article estimated that about £1 billion worth of UK property and land and infrastructure will be lost to the sea over the next century. Not that could be lost, but will be lost. So a huge amount of potential financial risk here. And as a consequence, now this information is available, it really is vital to consider. So just as a quick poll, I'm going to launch one here. So this image here is of Burning Gap. And hopefully you can see on there is a number of lines. So this image was taken in the early 1900s, and I want you to choose which line A, B and C you think best represents the coastline today. So hopefully I should be able to see a poll in there with 3 choices. Please do select. I'll get that going. And once it's finished, we'll then be able to close that and go on. So I'll give you about 20 or 30 seconds to have a little think. Okay, I'll give you 10 more seconds. Still waiting for a few people to cast their votes. Okay, seems to have steadied. So just closing that, should hopefully see those results now. So about 27% of you voted A, 40% of you voted B, and 33% of you voted C. So for those of you who voted A, you are correct. You can hopefully see that there are 8 original cottages along that stretch. Now there are only 4 remaining, the most recent of which was demolished in 2014. So a significant amount of coastline has been lost in this region. And unfortunately, this is not isolated just to this part of the country. This is hazards which are occurring across all parts of the country. An important feature to note, which I'm just going to touch on here, is the understanding of shoreline management plans. Now, shoreline management plan is essentially the government and local authority dictated plan and agreed plan for how that stretch of coastline is going to be managed. And this has been applied for every stretch of coastline across England and Wales. And it's of one of 3 choices. One is hold the line, which is where they will basically introduce features like sea defences to make sure that there isn't any coastal erosion. One is known as managed realignment, where they will basically allow a certain degree of erosion to a point where they deem that they can then maintain it efficiently. And then the final one is known as no active intervention, where essentially they will just leave it to its own devices. And this shoreline management plan is all based upon basically a cost-benefit scenario. So if the cost of introducing those defences is more than the value of property is going to save, then there will be basically most likely no defences introduced. However, of course, for areas such as city centres, you will find that the cost of introducing a seawall will massively be less than the value of property and infrastructure saved. However, for more sort of rural areas such as this one in Burning Gap and other parts of the country, it is too costly to introduce those defences, and they also have to consider the impacts on local environmental factors as well. And so this is an example of where it is known as no active intervention. And this final case study here is also an area where the shoreline management plan is no active intervention, as it's deemed that the cost of saving these properties is going to be too significant compared to the value of property will be lost. So it is pretty brutal, and it is reviewed, but depending on budget cuts or spending increases, and so it can be liable to change. So this collapse here of a property ironically named Cliffhanger occurred over a couple of days from 30th May to 2nd of June last year. The property had been purchased only 2 years previously for about £200,000, and it was a cash purchase also. So that means that, while doesn't necessarily mean that they would have always had as many searches done, because they're not having to satisfy a mortgage for a lender. But even if they had done every search under the sun available at that time, because there was no information available or assessment available on coastal hazards, they wouldn't have been able to really find out further information on the risks of that property. And so really it's just a bit of an unfortunate case. So here there was a series of landslides which then demolished the property, as you can see from these images, and it has been pretty devastating. And so this homeowner has lost their sort of forever home that they had purchased. The neighbouring properties had since been evacuated, and they have been allowed to return back, but they have essentially been told that over the next 5 to 10 years, their properties will likely follow suit. And at this stage, it really is just a really unfortunate situation, as they are probably going to be unable to sell their homes, because people are now going to be aware of this information, particularly if they do simple online searches. And no insurance provider is going to go anywhere near them also. So that they've been told the best they can hope for is potentially covering the costs, a government grant covering the cost of demolishing their properties, as they could be held liable for pollution damages if they let them fall into the sea. So if we just look at how the coastline has retreated in this region, hopefully we'll see that it has accelerated over time. So this is using historic maps to build a picture of where that cliff face was. As you can see, it has been just slowly encroaching in. And then often is the way with coastal erosion, it isn't just a gradual centimetre per year by centimetre per year. It is then done by these landslip events, which will erode significant meters at a time, and then it will then not erode for a while and then erode again. So the current models picture that by the year 2050, there will be a number of additional properties affected. However, basically a 95% confidence-based scenario. We take some less confident scenarios, but basically factoring into potential account more severe climate change that will be going ahead. So if we're not able to meet certain emission targets, then over the next 50 to 100 years, we could start to see significant proportions of this coastline be lost. So that essentially is a summary of that, and just quickly a couple of key notes on these coastal hazards is that, unfortunately, with climate change becoming more and more of a feature over the coming years, this is only going to become a worsening effect on people's livelihoods on the coast. Consequence of this is that there are several 100,000 properties that risk either collapsing into the sea and then potentially also losing value as with this approaching coastline in these areas, if a property is basically only going to be given 10 to 15 years left, that is of course going to have a detrimental impact on its value. And finally, it is partly decided based on these shoreline management plans, which are government and local authority dictated, and they are subject to change and spending reviews. So it is really important when also considering buying or selling on these coastal regions to make sure that everyone is fully aware of the shoreline management plan and also basically aware that there could be changes associated with that. So thank you very much for your sort of morning time. I think that was about 20-25 minutes. Apologies for a little dropout in audio there. So yes, if you do have any questions at this stage, there is a Q&A functionality that you should see in the little box to the side. If you want to ask me or anyone any questions at this stage, please do fire away, and I'll we'll hang around for a few minutes now just to answer those. But as I said, there is then going to be another Q&A session at the end of Seb's next bit, so more than happy to go through some then. Okay, I think one's come in, but it's trying. Okay, so one question: what do they fill in the holes with when a sinkhole appears? It's a good question. It depends essentially what caused that hole, but typically for old mine workings, the preferred material is either foamed concrete or grout, which is a similar sort of material. But essentially, pump a hole as full of as much concrete as possible to try and basically prevent any. The beauty of foam concrete is that it does act as a quite viscous liquid and then can basically seep into lots of the little cracks and subsections of these workings. And so for that case in St Albans, as an example, they did fill it up with foam concrete several times, and basically it kept sinking away and filling in other sections of the workings. And so it took them a number of months to actually finally get it to stop sort of disappearing and stabilize it effectively. But hopefully at that stage, it does mean that it is now probably one of the most solid spots you can live in St Albans. So the irony being that it's probably good to live there now. Very nice place to live as well, as I'm told. Okay. I think that's it for now for those questions. So as I said, I'm going to be hanging around and we'll be happy to answer any questions later. Yes, so I think at this stage we'll hand over to Seb. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen quickly and hopefully can then pass over to Seb and he will then take the next session. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Is that sharing okay? Can you see that, Tim? Okay. Can you see that all right? Sorry, my sound seems to have gone.
It's still just showing the PowerPoint overview rather than the sort of slideshow view.
Perfect. Does that work now?
That is working perfect.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Yeah, cheers for that insight, Tim. That was really great to see. So just a brief overview of what I'll run through in the second session. So be getting to know terra firma, the relevant ground hazards we have and the modules. So whether that be coal mining, all other mining, clay subsidence, coastal hazards, natural ground hazards, and also any additional information we provide, as well as just a brief overview of the ground report and what it contains. And then, as Tim touched on, another Q&A session at the end. So if you do have any questions for us, please do fire away. So looking at terra firma as a whole, terra firma was formed 5 years ago. We had our 5th birthday in August of 2020 last year. We're still an independent company. It relates us back to continuing our vision to educate people to understand the ground. And by people, I mean the home buyers and the conveyancers and all those involved in the property transaction. And our team is full of experts in such fields as sort of geoscience and mining engineering, and also geospatial data specialists. Our goal is always to help people and businesses understand the exposure to the ground and obviously look at the relevant financial loss and disruption from our ground hazards. And what we do, we help educate the industry. We're not set by huge sales targets to push our reports. We just want people to essentially understand the ground. So these are our team of experts behind the scenes. Many of you know Tom already. He's our CEO and founder. We also have Dr. Tim, who's his background being geodata scientist, as well as a few people you may speak to on the phone. So you've got Maura, Tim, obviously on the call today, and Charlie, who's the newest team member. They're our team of geologists. So essentially, when you do get through on the phones, you have our team of experts there which really helps us, obviously makes us unique and helps us set out our vision. Our service is very important to us, as it is to our clients. So who else would you rather speak to when you can just get through to our geologist, and they have their unique understanding of the ground hazards. So we don't go to site, of course. We provide an expert desktop report. We rely on the data, which then brings up the variable qualities, the different levels of suitability for property-specific ground risk assessment, and a range of sources from open to commercial with the data, whether it be geology data, mining data, soil data, or coastal hazards. It allows our data to be correct and up to date and professionally accurate. This then allows our teams to expertise in geology, geoscience, or soil science, as well as their relevant skills in geoprocessing, quality assurance, data analysis, and modelling. And as I touched on, it allows then our data to be correct and up to date, professionally accurate, which then results in a great appreciation of strengths and weaknesses available of our ground data, as well as helping the property professionals and the home buyers get the useful insights into the expert interpretation of data that we provide. That's why our main focus on the ground and improving the risk assessment in relation to property. It's a formula we like to use, which is hazard times exposure equals risk. We found that you can have all the data, well, all the unique ground data you like, but we at Terra Firma are actually not too concerned with that, as the data only gives you the location of the hazard and its exposure. What we tend to find is that a hazard is the potential risk, but what we're actually interested in first understanding is what that risk is, and then communicating the actual risk clearly to all parties involved in the property transaction, which then is nicely outlaid in our reports. And as touched on, we are unique in the fact that we provide the risk assessment from our team of experts, and our PI backs our expert professional opinion and interpretation. So moving on to our ground report as a whole. As you can see, these are the relevant areas that it covers and the information that we provide on. Our ground report was first introduced in September of 2018. We update it yearly, so 2019 we updated it with our clay substance module, and then further again into last year in September we included our newest module, which is our coastal hazards, and we've had a fantastic uptake on both of these. So starting with our official Con 29M, we were the first non-public body to provide the Con 29M report in July of 2018. We kept pioneering and updating it to include a free mine entry interpretive report, as well as making our Con 29M clearer for the end user. This has actually helped our pass rate to rise to 99% in this time. And we also include the buffer report as standard and communicate all claims in a 50-meter radius. And in comparison, if you were to purchase the Con 29M report on its own directly with the Coal Authority, you would actually need to buy this in addition. So we're not only saving yourselves money, but we're also saving time in the process. This map here shows the coal reporting area. So as we well know, coal has been mined within this country since the Stone Age, continues to this very day. It's stretched across the country. So the majority of coal mining occurred during sort of the Industrial Revolution, at which point around 1 million people were employed with the industry. And as you can see, the various big coal areas are situated. So starting with sort of like south of Wales, moving up into the Midlands, Yorkshire, and then of course up in the northeast. And as Tim touched on briefly in his presentation, you've got the coal mining in numbers. Obviously, the massive one for me is obviously the 8 million properties that are actually on the coal field in England and Wales, which is a huge number that people probably don't even realise. Moving on to all other mining, we provide a comprehensive risk assessment, which looks at not only just the coal mining, but also covering the 55 different minerals that were mined. These include the likes of Cheshire brine, tin, limestone and gypsum. And what that also helps us with is that we're also partnered with Cornwall consultants who specialise in tin and copper mining in the southwest. So it really then helps us support our expert opinion and interpretation and really push it forward. And again, it's similar to the map to what Tim showed you earlier. 80% of us think that coal mining when it comes to mining, but as you can see on the map, it highlights the various areas up and down the country with various other mining activity. With me starting obviously at Terra Firma quite recently, this is a huge surprise to myself and an insight as to sort of, I had no idea that there's so many types across the country. And as you can see from the map, there's a vast majority of other mining, and that's why on our ground report we like to cover all the areas of mining and not just coal. Moving on to soil-related subsidence. Our soil-related subsidence was added, as I mentioned, in 2019. We had a Dr. Tim Farewell join us at the beginning of January 2020. Dr. Tim studied at the University of Cranfield and pioneered and wrote a book on soil subsidence in the UK. So as you can imagine, we're very privileged to have his expertise on board. Again, you can see from the module itself, our professional opinion. And also based on that, our data, we can actually provide you with a Cranfield score and an NHBC score. We provide from our data set a susceptibility score in which we take the first part of the postcode in the relevant area, which we then find this helps provides the purchaser with clear advice to them to make sure they're taking out the correct but also relevant insurance and make sure their property is covered. Looking at soil-related subsidence in numbers, as you can see, 64 million was the total cost of subsidence claims in the 3-month period between July and September of 2018, as well as also in that same timeline, we had 10,000 plus subsidence claims. As most of us know, or me certainly as a football fan, it was around the 2018 World Cup. So we had the relevant, well, remember the hot months we all had in that period, hundreds of thousands of people in the beer gardens, etc. So you can see certainly why, with the heats in that time, why these numbers are appearing. And also what we estimate as well is that 3 billion was actually the total cost of the economy over the last decade. And as you can see, most data providers give you just a soil type across the country, but we at Terra Firma also look at the climate change using our Cranfield score together with the soil data, which then provides more detailed and takes into account sort of certain conditions. This is how we calculate and relate to the soil subsidence. And then what I'm about to show you now is just a short and brief video of soil subsidence that Dr. Tim has kindly put together for us. So starting with the middle, we have sandy soil. This is sort of sand that will wash away, which causes subsidence, of course. And then on the right is being normal soil. So it's a non-clay soil. There isn't much movement at all. And with the left being more clay related. So it will expand once wet, but of course, when it dries out, it will shrink, causing subsidence. And then just looking in reverse, of course, this won't actually happen, but just to show you a brief explanation of it, you can see that the soils start to dry out and shrinking happens, which is obviously the biggest cause of subsidence in the summer, hotter, warmer months in the UK. So as I touched on during that World Cup period, this is the reason why those hot summer months are really causing the ground to really shrink up. And then as well as our other modules, we also cover all other natural ground, whether that be collapsible deposits, slope movement and running sands. As you can see, we provide a grade based on the vulnerability of the property itself on the relevant risks, and again outline the property boundary to show you how these risks impact the property in question. And then again, the map that Tim showed you briefly, you can see in the graph above the various ground perils throughout the country. And what we'd like to say, we'd like to cover this across all modules like our coal mining, as it very much goes alongside our vision, which is to educate everyone about the ground. This is a case example. So this is Ripon in the borough of Harrogate in North Yorkshire. This sinkhole actually opened up in 2016. It forced the evacuation of 12 neighbouring properties, and that's due to the area lying upon gypsum bedrock. Gypsum bedrock is a water-soluble rock that can lead to the formation of underground caves. And as you can see from the example of the photo, this has caused the back garden to essentially be non-existent, and it is just a hole essentially in the ground. And then moving on to our newest module, coastal hazards. We may have not been the first to introduce it. However, we are the first to actually make it property specific within our report and want to make it relevant with the data. And again, it's backed by our professional opinion from our team of geologists. This module looks at the risks to property being with the coastal hazards And again, as I touched on, it's property specific. So we are the first to provide this. So it allows us to look into more detail on the property itself. And you cannot really escape it at the moment. I mean, most recently there was one yesterday and also one last week, but they're in the news almost weekly, and stories are coming from all over the country, which you may have seen. Most people associate it with being certain areas of the country. However, as you can see, they're all over. Be it a huge cliff fall at West Bay, where Broadchurch is filmed, or another village abandoned to the sea, or property collapsing after winter storms. There's an increasing public awareness to the risks found at the coast. And all these articles are actually within the last year, and most cases actually being within the last few months. So some really scary stuff there to make it relevant for yourselves. And of course, what else we provide is additional information. So on the ground hazards, whether that being oil and gas, mineral planning and radon. So first, looking at this map identifies the certain areas within the country which are either inactive or active with mineral planning permissions. So as you can see, you have the onshore licenses, which are those highlighted in the sort of the orange with the black outline, and also the RD14 blocks, which are for oil and gas. Those are the ones that you can see based all over the country, but are more blurred out in the background. We also have radon levels, radon being a natural assurance of gas. People associate in the southwest, as you can see, obviously the red areas in the southwest are predominantly. However, as you can see, it's actually all over the country and not just there. It can be fatal if not resolved, but can easily be solved with just improved ventilation. And then just to the overview of our ground report. As you can see, we have the official Con 29M in the report. We also cover all other mining, natural ground, soil substance, and of course coastal hazards. And those modules there are all backed by our professional and expert interpretation and risk assessment. And then, as I mentioned, we also provide information on oil and gas activity, mineral planning, and also radon. And with our team of experts, we will provide the risk assessment for the property and land transactions. Obviously, of course, we're trusted mining and ground expertise embedded in every report, which then helps us provide sort of peace of mind for conveyancers and home buyers and those all involved in the transaction process. And then that brings me to a nice close. Again, all our reports are available from Search UK, so please do make contact with them to order or ask any questions. And of course, with the Q&A, please do fire away with any questions for either what Tim's gone through briefly or even myself on what I've gone through today.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Seb. So yeah, first question there is what is ball clay? So ball clay and china clay are often sort of interchanged synonymously. They're essentially a really high quality style of clay, which are often used in things like chinaware. It's what makes them have a nice shiny sheen. And as a result of that, they are very desirable, and they are found very localized in certain regions. And the particular key areas are in the southwest in Devon and Cornwall. Areas around sort of Newton Abbot and also sort of Dartmoor, yeah, has had some, because there is still a very significant economic value. It is one of the key materials that is still extracted to this day, particularly by operators such as Sibelco. It is one that is, internationally used, and as a result is very, very sort of desirable, and it has also got a very historic legacy associated with it as well.
Great, thanks for answering that, Tim. Any more questions?
So yeah, just to sort of reiterate what Seb said, yeah, we are fully partnered with Search UK. Their team are more than capable of answering any questions really from that front, but we have sort of dropped in our website details there if you had any sort of questions on our report specifically. I'd say if you wanted to know about sort of availability and pricing, I'd definitely message the team at Search UK directly, and they'll be able to help out. And also, yeah, as mentioned, Sam will be in touch after this with a link to the recording, as well as we'll make a copy of the slides available also, and can then go from any questions from there. And yeah, so I said we'll hang around for a few more minutes and see if there are any more questions come in. But if not, and you have other bits to get onto, then yeah, thank you very much for your time this morning. I think Sam, I'm not sure if you wanted to just jump on and say any words. Yeah, if you
Absolutely
wanted to.
fine. So thank you all so much for joining this morning. I really hope you found it interesting. I know I sat here listening attentively. If you do have any questions, you can email us at Searches UK. So our email address is marketing@searchesuk.co.uk. We'll be more than happy to assist with any questions you may have. We do have sample reports to send out if you would, do want any. And otherwise, if there are no other questions, I'm just double checking now.
Not looking like it at this stage.
No, not at the moment. So that's not a problem at all. Well, thank you both so much. And we'll look forward to speaking to you all again soon. Have a lovely day. Take care. Bye.
Perfect. Thank you all. Bye.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.